What is it about Star Trek that makes it this enduring force? For many, it's the hopeful vision of a future where humanity has put aside their nonsense and are moving forward together as one. Probably because we deleted Twitter. But to make it to 58 years, to make it this long, I think it stands to reason that the episodes themselves had to be a bit good. There's nothing more important in this world than a good first impression, and that is what we are here to look at today. The Star Trek premiere episodes, all 11 episodes. I'm looking at the very first episode, the first impression. Was it good? What did I like about it? Did it hook me in enough to make me want to watch more of this show? Spoiler alert, yes. It did. Before I get into this, just a reminder that this is my ranking, my opinions, but I'd love to know what you think. Let me know in the comments below how you would rank Star Trek's premiere episodes, and if you want to make a tier list like I've got here, I've put a link to that tier maker in the description below as well. All right, let's get started. Let's go in chronological order, starting with the show that officially started it all. The original series is The Man Trap. It's definitely not the show that the creators intended to be the first showcase of Star Trek, but that's what we got. So in this episode, the Enterprise encounters a soul-sucking vampire. That's probably the easiest way to put it. Now, while this wasn't the intended first episode, I do think that it does serve as an effective introduction for the ship, for its crew, and for the setting as well. Another thing that makes this episode stand out is Hua Chang's creature design, the Salt Vampire, a very famous early visual of the show. It's a Monster of the Week episode, and it's not the best showcase of what Star Trek was about to be, but it's a good spin on the Monster of the Week. This isn't just a monster that's going about killing crew without remorse. No, this monster wants to live. It's doing all of this stuff out of self-preservation, and that gives the episode a very tragic feel at the end. It's not the best setup episode, but like I said, it wasn't supposed to be. It does a good enough job of introducing us to the world, to the characters, to the ship, and I like it. I think it's a good episode. For that reason, I am going to put The Man Trap in Buckle Up. The animated series Beyond the Farthest Star. So this is the episode where the Enterprise encounters a giant ancient alien ship, but things soon take a turn when an alien presence tries to take over the Enterprise. Of all the episodes on the list, I think Beyond the Farthest Star is the best at encapsulating all of the strengths and all of the weaknesses of its show. It's an incredibly ambitious episode in what it's trying to do. This giant alien spaceship, it's beyond what the original series would have ever been able to do, and that's something that's made possible by the animation, but the animation is also not very good. I like it. I like the animated series, but I think I like it because it's quaint. It's also a shame that this episode goes from this really interesting, mysterious, ancient alien vessel and then just kind of devolves into this alien possession episode, something that we had many times in the original series. So love the ambition. I personally like the animation, but I do get that the animation is also not very good. Kind of mixed on this one. I'm putting Beyond the Farthest Star in, The Trial Begins. Nearly 2 decades later, and the next generation marks the return of Star Trek to the small screen with its epic 2-parter Encounter at Farpoint. This is it. This is where it began, the golden era of Trek. But my God, did we have to go through some shit to get to the good times. The first thing that stands out with Encounter at Farpoint is its visuals. Pretty dated by our modern standards, but back then, my word, this was impressive stuff. Visually, I can't fault the episode. I think it looks fantastic. People pushed really hard against this. This was such a radical departure. This was such a completely new vision of Star Trek. Personally, I didn't have a problem with that, really, because there were a bunch of problems that were more pressing than that. Okay, right, so here's a confession. I like TNG's first 2 seasons. I know it's not very good, but for some reason it just kind of hits all of my nostalgia buttons. It's very much like chicken soup. I've used this expression before, but whenever I'm ill or feeling depressed or just hate the world, this is the Star Trek that I put on. It just reminds me of a happier, more innocent time, and that's it, really. But even though I like this stuff, I absolutely recognize its problems, and there are many problems with this. The episode feels like it's cobbled together, and if you feel that as well, that's because it was. DC Fontana's story, we had Gene Roddenberry's story, there we go. Well, it didn't really work, did it? We also got some really awkward performances. Marina Sirtis's Deanna Troi just way over the top with the emotion, to the point where Michael Burnham would be telling her to calm it down. And at the risk of voicing a controversial opinion here, I don't think Patrick Stewart is particularly great in this episode either. We know now from the man himself that he didn't think the show was going to be a success and pretty much just refused to unpack his suitcase for the first year. And if he would have carried on performing like this, I think he would have been right. The episode does set the stage for greatness. It gives us the platform that the show was able to build on. Was it able to build on that quickly? No. It's uneven, it's stiff, it's cobbled together. The show had to start somewhere, and this was it, but it wasn't perfect. And for that reason, very much like Q in the episode itself, I'm putting this in The Trial Begins. Emissary, Deep Space Nine. Whew, here we go. This is a very radical departure. No ships exploring the galaxy. It's all happening on one space station in a very troubled part of space. The main protagonist doesn't even want to be there in this episode. He's trying to resign from Starfleet. He hates Picard. What's going on? What is this? You know what? I'm just going to show my hand right now. I'm putting this at Love at First Flight right now. This is the best premiere episode of the lot. If you like deep, introspective character exploration episodes, this is it, my friend. Deep Space Nine might not be for everyone's taste, but I don't really think that you can argue against the fact that this was a very, very strong start. I loved the way they used the Battle at Wharf 359 as the catalyst to kickstart this show and really helped expand the Star Trek universe into essentially what was going to become like a proto-MCU. Avery Brooks's performance just really dynamic and spanning the entire emotional spectrum, but doing it in a way that really gets us on board with the character. This is one of the best single performances in Star Trek history. Given the fact that it was a show that was set in one location, you had to get the location right, and I feel like they did that. A very bold, creative decision, one that allowed the show to tap into some really difficult subject material, allegories to things like the Nazi occupation and the Holocaust, really difficult stuff that gave the show a lot of dramatic heft. There are some people out there that don't like Deep Space Nine, and I do get it. It's much slower, it's much darker, but for me, I love Emissary. I think it's Star Trek's best premiere episode. It's bold, it's brave, it's got some fantastic performances from Avery Brooks right down across the board. It sets the stage for what was to come, more serialized stories, more complex stories, and Star Trek is a much richer franchise for having Deep Space Nine. Voyager's caretaker, Janeway and crew are thrown 70,000 light years across the galaxy, ending up in the Delta Quadrant. That's a bit inconvenient. Very much like Deep Space Nine, this was Star Trek's golden era, so they could do no wrong, and they were operating with an awful lot of confidence, and it really shows in this episode. Very strong from a production standpoint, although I will say that at this point they could probably churn out this kind of Star Trek in their sleep. For me, what makes Caretaker such a good, promising first episode is the strength of the cast, particularly Kate Mulgrew's Janeway. It is impressive how well this first episode is able to introduce and have us familiar by the end of the episode to almost every single member of the crew. The episode does have its fair share of issues. I always found it very disappointing how resolved the Starfleet and Marquis issue was by the end of it, with Chakotay and his crew just decked out in Starfleet uniform at the end. I also feel like the Delta Quadrant could have been a bit weirder. Everything just felt like it was part of pre-existing Star Trek. The Kazon, discount Klingons, the Okampa, just aliens with more shit glued to their foreheads. I feel like they could have given us a weirder take on the universe. They're 70,000 light years from home. That's a fucking long way away. Caretaker is a good, not great start. It does exactly what it needed to do, and it did that with quite a lot of confidence. It establishes Janeway and her crew well, even though I am still disappointed by the lack of tension between Starfleet and the Marquis by the end. Yeah, I'm pretty confident putting this in buckle up. There we go. Broken Bow, the last premiere episode of the Berman Trek era, and we're going way back, all the way back to the beginning, over 100 years before the adventures of Kirk, Spock and the original Enterprise, and the very first human mission aboard the NX-01 Enterprise. If you know me, you know me. I love Enterprise. Completely unironically, I love pretty much every aspect of this show. And yeah, that includes its theme song. Anyone that honestly, seriously tells me that they hate Faith of the Heart has no joy in their hearts. You know what? I'm going to go one step further. You know the rejigged version of the song that plays in season 3 and 4? I prefer that one. I don't care. Hit the dislike. Disagree with me. I don't give a fuck. Now we can debate the finer points of Enterprise and its qualities and its legacy, but I think an indisputable fact is that Broken Bow is one of Star Trek's best premiere episodes. It's quite impressive how it's able to give us a radically different view of Star Trek, but still have it familiar and somehow have the prequel be believable, with its future technology being obviously more advanced than what we saw in TOS, yet somehow still believable, like that technology, which was more advanced, would somehow evolve into the bulky, clunky buttons that we would see in the original series. I think it's fun seeing humans be so inexperienced with interstellar travel and relations with alien races, and I like the story. I think it's engaging, it's action-packed, it's a really breezy, well-paced first 90 minutes of TV. And let's talk about Scott Bakula. What a guy. I think he made a good first impression as Captain Archer, as this captain that was the missing link between humanity as we know it now and the humans that we would see in the original series. Now this is a near perfect premiere episode for me, but it does still have its flaws. The temporal Cold War introduction doesn't really do much for me, and I'm not particularly fond of the way the show introduced T'Pol. The drum between her and Archer just feels quite forced, and when she wasn't being positioned as this difficult and ambiguous character, she's just there to have stuff rubbed on her in really salacious scenes. I mean, teenage TrekLad didn't mind that, obviously. Broken Bow is a solid introduction episode. It establishes this prequel setting. It gives us humans that don't have a clue what's going on. Everyone's looking at transporter technology like, wow, what's all this? I really like the action, and for me, Enterprise is a show that I still go back to and I still love. And I am putting it at love at first flight, because it was the first flight. The Vulcan hello, the Discovery era begins, the modern Trek era begins. Another prequel and a very radical new look for Star Trek. Initially, I was very excited by this show, particularly the idea that we were going to have a show that centered not on a captain, but as someone who was a subordinate. The non-command character, the character that would spearhead this show and be the main protagonist, Sonequa Martin Green's Michael Burnham. And this show focuses on her controversial decisions that essentially ignite a very fierce war with the Klingon Empire. Where do I begin with this one? Good stuff first. On the whole, this episode looks pretty good, and I particularly love the look of space just being a bit more diverse and a bit more dynamic, and a little bit more dangerous too. I think the performances are also very good, particularly Sonequa Martin Green. We also are graced with Michelle Yeoh. What an incredible name to have in your Star Trek show. Oh, Doug Jones as well, and he's fantastic as the show's new alien character Saru. But yeah, this episode has problems. The Klingons, not so much the design. I always believed that the Klingons could look different because they would be coming from different regions of space with different gravitational pulls and different sun rays. I think the main issue is more just with their depiction, with the way T'Kuvma was leading this very pro-Klingon, very xenophobic campaign against the Federation. Given the fact that Discovery was premiering during a very difficult time in world politics, I don't think it takes a genius to put 2 and 2 together and see what they were trying to do. And I don't think it works because the Klingons can be aggressive just as they are. They don't need any of this extra B-Klingon stuff tacked on. But the biggest issue that I have is more the fact that the show is so dark in tone. I don't mean dark like Deep Space Nine dark. Deep Space Nine was able to be dark and challenging and gritty, but still hopeful as well. Discovery has this quite nihilistic ugliness to it. Having said that though, I do remember enjoying the episode. I think it was promising, I think it was challenging, and for that reason I think that I'm putting the Vulcan Hello in The Trial Begins. Remembrance marks the return of Jean-Luc Picard, now retired and drawn back into action when a mysterious young woman seeks his help, leading him to uncover a conspiracy involving synthetic life forms. Picard. Okay, here we go. After 2 prequel shows and 3 alternative prequel movies, we were finally back. We were finally looking forward to the future. And while Remembrance is an intriguing start for the show, there's a lot of stuff here that I really struggled with. A very challenging first episode of what would be a very challenging first season of what would be an incredibly challenging TV show for me. Now, to give the show some credit, and I'm probably going to risk a hot take here, I do like what Picard's first season did in trying to lean away from the established Next Generation stuff that we were all very familiar with. I like that it tried to introduce new characters like Daj. I like the fact that it pushed against bringing all of the old gang back. Like Discovery, Picard leans into more mature storytelling, dealing with Picard's feelings of legacy and regret. But like Discovery, it falls too much into this pessimistic tone. And considering the fact that this is a show that's supposed to be taking place after Nemesis, I find a lot of what we got here and what we would subsequently get in the show to be very hard to reconcile. And once again, it's serialized Star Trek that's just not very good. This over-reliance on mystery boxes and conspiracies, and everybody associated with Starfleet is an arse clown. And the action that we get is sloppy and generic. It just doesn't feel like Star Trek to me. However, at the time, I was willing to give it a try. I was willing to see it out and watch it and try and enjoy it. And for that reason, considering the fact that I am looking at these episodes as the very first one and I'm not looking at it in retrospect, I'm going to put this as bumpy start. Onto something much happier and lighter, Second Contact, the first episode of Star Trek Lower Decks, a show that follows the crew of the USS Cerritos, a starship focused on less glamorous missions as they deal with the aftermath of First Contact missions. I love Lower Decks. I think it's a really good show that's found its groove. It's got characters that I love, and I'm very sad to hear that it's going to be ending at the conclusion of its 5th season. But for me, this show did not get off to a very good start at all. Really enjoyed its focus on non-senior officers. I thought it was a really unique take that harkened back to TNG's episode of the same name, which I thought was pretty neat. The voice talent gave the show a light, airy, fun energy, and I definitely liked that about it. But as a fan of animated comedies, which this show was definitely marketed as, it felt a bit too much to me like it was just Rick and Morty with a Star Trek reskin. It also fell into a really awkward trap in that it was kind of too adult for kids, but it was also too childish for adults as well. It was in that awkward grey area that no comedy ever wants to find itself in. A lot of the humour in this episode just doesn't work. It's just references. It's just, hey, do you remember this? Do you remember that? Hey, she said that. Isn't that cool? Gary Mitchell? I remember Gary Mitchell. That's not comedy. That's just saying things you remember really fast. This was a wonky first episode of a show that would find its footing and get much, much better. But this was a rough start. It's an animated comedy that was not adult enough for adults, adults and not funny enough. So yeah, wasn't a big fan of Second Contact, and for that reason I'm putting it in as bumpy start. Lost and Found, the first episode of Star Trek Prodigy, the latest animated show that was designed this time explicitly for children. I don't know if any kids are actually watching this. I hope they are. I really like Prodigy, and a lot of that stems from just how strong this first episode was. What I like about Prodigy is you can watch it with your kids. They might not understand everything, and that's okay. There's some stuff that I don't get, but for the most part it's an enjoyable sci-fi romp that acts as a really good gateway into the Star Trek universe. The people who are making this show absolutely get Star Trek. I really love Prodigy's focus on adventure and teamwork and how these disparate aliens can all come together in unity and work together. The animation in Prodigy is phenomenal. It's very non-traditional and very unique, and I think it works really, really well. I really like the animation, really love the visuals of this show. And the characters, really, really likable characters, really good voice cast. By the end of this episode, you understand and know all of the characters at a base level, and that's more than you could say for what they did for the Discovery crew in 5 fucking seasons. And yes, we get Janeway at the end. This is how you reintroduce a legacy character. This is how you do it. Take note, Picard. You can't take note because you've already ended. What am I talking about? But like Lower Decks, Prodigy has issues, and this is probably why the show won't go beyond its 2 seasons. It falls into this crevice where it's probably too adult for kids and too kids for adults. And if that is the case, if you're an adult and you won't watch this because you think it's for kids, please just watch this show. You will be amazed by how good this show is. Watch this first one. This is what this video is made for. Very much like Prodigy, it's not perfect as a premiere episode, so I am going to put it as buckle up. And finally, we come to Strange New Worlds, the first episode of Strange New Worlds. It's a really nice throwback to classic TOS, but with modern sensibilities. It gives TOS a modern makeover from a production standpoint, and I think it works really well. This first episode is very much like dipping your toe into a warm bath. Kind of gently eases us back into this world, introduces us particularly to Anson Mount Pike. It's a good, safe episode that doesn't challenge us too much, and I appreciated that about it. The biggest strength of Strange New Worlds is obviously Anson Mount Pike. Very likable, very good looking. That hair, spot on. And yeah, that speech at the end, I know it wound up some people, but sorry if it did. Personally, I found it to be a powerful and effective speech and a really good way to integrate modern politics and moralizing into the classic Star Trek mold. Although I would argue that was always there. Some weaker aspects of this episode, I don't think the crew were introduced quite as strong as Pike. The most egregious was Bruce Horak's Hemmer just having like this walk-on cameo right at the end. I mean, could they not have done something with him in this episode? But for the most part, I think Strange New Worlds was a barnstormer of a first episode, and for that reason, I am putting it in Love at First Flight. I loved it. That's my list, but I want to know how you would rank Star Trek's premiere episodes. Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to give this video a like and subscribe to the channel for more videos like this coming soon. Next in my head is my ranking of the Star Trek movies. It's a very old video, probably time for a remake, but if you liked what I did here, maybe go check that out next. Until next time, I'm the TrekLad. Live long and prosper.